Welcome to the Book and You podcast. Today we're going to talk about a handful of ideas that are going to help you when you get stuck to be more creative. Tim, this is a really important topic. A lot of authors, writers come to us and say, hey, I'm getting stuck.
Yeah.
How do I spark my creativity? You've put a lot of time and effort, energy into this. Can't wait to talk about this with you today.
Yeah, well, I'm learning to be creative as you are, but I'm telling you, most people I meet say, I'm not creative. In fact, authors often start saying, ooh, I got a creative idea. By the time they're halfway in their book, they go, I don't have any creative ideas. I kind of leaked,
Sure.
So you're right, it is hard. I remember, Jared, a brainstorming meeting I was a part of. I was not leading the meeting, but I was in the midst of a bunch of really creative folks, and I thought, this is going to be a great discussion. But as we talked, it was very obvious, I think, to all of us, even though nobody wanted to say it, we're coming up with nothing. I mean, we're writing ideas on the whiteboard, but they're pretty dull. And it became very apparent that we're going nowhere fast, And I wanted to say, is this an elephant in the room? We're going nowhere here, Well, we started lowering the bar on creativity. You know how you start with a really high bar?
Yeah.
Pretty soon, that's a good idea, and it really wasn't 15 minutes ago.
Sure.
So lowering the bar is what we tend to do, and I want to help listeners today raise the bar. I just thought of a funny story. I got to tell it.
Love it.
Have you ever heard John Crist, a comedian?
Sure.
Okay,
Yeah.
he's funny. He was talking about how he was on a flight, and there was a passenger that had a medical need. And so the intercom barks out, is there any doctor on board the flight? And nobody responds. And then later you hear, how about a nurse? Is there a nurse on board? Nothing. And of course, John Crist, the comedian, goes, they started going down to, has anybody watched a television show? Grey's Anatomy.
Yeah.
Anybody dress up like a nurse at Halloween?
Oh, no.
It's so stupid. But I think we do that. And I want today for us to pull out the creativity in these writers that are listening.
Oh, it should be really important. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's not lower the bar.
That's right.
Let's keep it high.
That's right.
I love it. Yeah. Let's dive into that.
Okay.
Tim.
Well, the big idea that I want to share today, and then we're going to list some ideas, is one of our habitude images. It's a great metaphor that it encourages me every single time I feel stuck. And I call it bikes and birds. Bikes and birds. So here's the big idea. If you've ever seen one of those old photographs, 100 years old, of Orville and Wilbur Wright and the very first airplane, you might, first of all, it's black and white and very grainy, but you might have noticed the way it looks a little bit like a flying bicycle. It's got wings on it, but there's poles and wheels with spokes. Well, there's a reason for that. For months and months and months, Orville and Wilbur Wright had been studying the flight of birds. Just looking at pictures of birds and how their wings tilted to give them lift. As a trade, they owned a bicycle shop. So they combined the birds that they were studying and the bikes that they were making, put it into two, and you have an airplane. They created a whole nother, not just idea, industry that we take advantage of all the time.
Sure.
But it was simply taking two already existing ideas to get a third one. I think creativity works that way. Very little. In fact, Solomon said there's nothing new under the sun.
Right.
But we can put two things together that already exist and come up with something new. So I think history is full of writers that kind of combined a couple of metaphors or a couple of ideas, and now we've got something that seems really, really fresh.
It's a great misconception, I think, that creative people just pull things out of the air, out of nowhere. They're just
right.
good at making. Some people are, in fact, really good at starting from scratch and having nothing on the canvas. But by and large, like you said, there's nothing new under the sun.
Yeah.
So how are we filling the creative tank to be able to, attach ideas to other ideas that work? I love that example of the Wright brothers.
Yeah. Well, you're exactly right. And today we're going to talk about those ideas. Listeners, I want you to get ready and maybe even grab something you can write on if you're not driving. We're going to just lob out some ideas that could spark something. But Jared, I'm thinking about history. I mentioned a minute ago, history's full of these ideas. Let me just throw out two or three. Many people don't know that before the printing press was ever invented, Johann Gutenberg worked at a wine press. And I'm guessing one day he thought, what if we pressed words, not wine? Well, that changed the world. Wow. I mean, in one machine, reading and writing and everything else, we're talking about authors here. Well, thank you, Johann, for that idea.
Sure.
But it was simply taking an existing idea and making a new one. Daniel Gauthier and Guy Laliberté created something called Cirque du Soleil. We've all heard of that. But you know what they did back in I guess it was the 80s or something? They took acrobatics, gymnastics, and circus, and it was 3 of them, and they did this incredible thing called Cirque du Soleil, which put the traditional circus out of business. But they came up with already existing industries and created another one. Wow. And then probably one of the most well-known people of this list is Steve Jobs, the late Steve Jobs. But Steve rarely did something brand new that had never been done before. But he took the smartphone and made an iPhone that was way better, or a MacBook Pro that was way better than the laptops we'd seen. So I guess I want to encourage you listeners, you have it in you. I think it's a God-given thing for every one of us. But sometimes we start buying into the idea, well, not me. And we start thinking about 2 out of 100 probably got it, and I don't got it.
Yeah. So. Well, you're a good example, too, of someone who has been able to put two and two together in that type of way. I even think about your college education. You've talked to me about that. Maybe share a little bit of how that has worked together in your career now and your writing. Yeah,
so I was a double major, and I had no idea what would happen when I got done with these two. But during my undergrad years, I was a major in commercial art. I loved cartooning and was an editorial cartoonist for a while. And was there on an art scholarship. So I had to declare that as a major to get the money. But my other major was theology. I loved life principles and scripture. But if you think about the most popular book that I have done is something called Habitudes, Images that Form Leadership Habits and Attitudes. We just did Bikes and Birds. That's one of them. But it's really, in one sense, it's the theology and the imagery. It's not just a faith-based thing, but it's taking the principles and then the image. And Habitudes has sold over 3 million copies, self-published. But I think it was because I took a really good idea, people love pictures, and a really good idea, people like timeless truths, put them together, and it's worked really well. And I don't think I'm brilliant, but I'm using the very principle that we're talking about today.
It's incredible. And you also stayed true to who you are authentically. I love this quote from Maya Angelou. We were talking about this briefly. We're all creative. But by the time we're 3 or 4 years old, someone has knocked creativity out of us. Some people shut up their kids who start to tell stories, kids dancing in their cribs, but someone will insist that they sit still. By the time the creative people are 10 or 12, they want to be like everybody else. It's fascinating as we consider, and challenging for those of us. I've got young kids, and it relates there. But also in terms of our creativity, how are we fostering and empowering creativity in our lives?
Well, I'm going to lob back a thought. I think it's the power of and. The older I get, the more boxy I tend to become, unless I'm careful. John talks about this. We're just in this little box and people pile or whatever. We need to knock the walls out of the box, and I think we do with the power of and. So I've got this concept, what if we added and something else or something else?
So good.
And listeners who are writers, be thinking about an and. If you feel like you've got a fairly average or mediocre idea, maybe that's going to be your key.
That's very good. Let's talk about let's get into the points today. So you have several things that help us jumpstart our creativity. I'd love for you to kind of take us through that on a journey today.
Okay, they're all doable and they're all free. Did you hear that? Free. So these are a handful of ideas. Here's one that I've used. When you're stuck and you're not feeling really creative, find a metaphor that you could share to illustrate your big idea. So you got this concept in a book, but you look at it and you go, 1,000 other people have said this. But if you could come up with a metaphor, a picture, if you will, that says it really well. And that's what the Habitudes are. So one of our concepts is drivers and passengers. We want to teach ownership and responsibility. And I felt like, well, what if you think about it like a driver and a passenger in the car? Passengers there going the same place, but he or she's not doing anything. The driver's owning it. I mean, I got to turn left. Shut up. I got to listen to my GPS system. So that's a simple way and a more fun way to teach responsibility to your kids, drivers and passengers.
That's good.
And I came up with that teaching my daughter Bethany how to drive. I gave her that lecture about owning herself, owning the drive.
It's a really good point. Just really quick here, I just want to say, things appear in our day-to-day lives.
Yes, they do.
And so that's a good example of you taking account of something that's happening to you.
That's right.
And then later remembering that situation and being able to use it as a metaphor.
That's exactly right. And I think great communicators do this. I think good authors do that. Be aware in your everyday life what's going on around you. You'll think of analogies, you'll think of experiences, you'll think of stories. But that's exactly what happened. Teaching my daughter how to drive, she could tell I just had a little epiphany here.
Yeah, sure.
We kind of stopped the driving lesson. I wrote some notes down. All right, here's another idea. If you're having trouble, you're feeling stuck, what about stories you could tell to drive home your big idea? I know everybody knows that, but sometimes when I'm writing books, I realize it's getting dull because they need a story. And we've taught on this very podcast, give them a point for their head, a picture for their heart, and a practice for their hands. So maybe you need to sprinkle in some more stories or pictures that are just liven it up and feel a little bit more
to touch the
engaging.
Heart.
Yeah, that's right.
Very, very good.
Yeah. Here's a third idea. We've touched on this already, but I'd like you listeners to get good at mixing two or more known concepts to create a new unknown concept. My favorite story of this, even though we've kind of given some already, was there were a couple of guys that happened to be in Paris, France at a conference. I think it was a tech conference. When they walked out at the end of the day, it was rainy and dull and gray, and they're trying to hail down a cab. And, when you're trying to hail down a cab, you're going, God knows when the next one's going to come along. We're all fighting over this one. But then they got to thinking, now, wait a minute. We live in a day of apps on our phone. What if we could create an app that would hail the cab for you? And they came up with Uber. But the point was two existing ideas.
Sure.
Cabs. And they said, what if we just enlist hundreds of thousands of people that got a car?
Yeah.
And that's what they did. I mean, who knows who's driving that Uber?
Yeah.
But I just love the fact that wasn't a something from nothing idea. It was something from two things idea.
Right. Power of and.
Yeah, that's right. The power of and.
Really, really good.
All right, here's another one. What if you could involve other people to deepen your message? Sometimes my creativity is sparked when I sit down with Tim Desopoulos, former president of Chick-fil-A, or you or someone, and it's just what you needed. They think a little bit differently, and they get your brain going in a new direction. And I would even say, talk with somebody that's completely outside of the topic of your book, because they're going to have really zany ideas that don't fit. They're going to come up with predictable ideas if they are in the same industry you're in, but they won't be if they're not. So
what I love about this idea is I think with AI and emerging technologies, a lot of what you can get readily is on the surface.
Yeah.
You use that word deepen, which is powerful. When you have those relationships, other industries, other perspectives, people that are coming from a different angle, it really does deepen and provide something for your message that you can't just farm out or microwave, right? And some of that collaboration is key to really making a message last.
I agree. And I'm thinking now of Arthur Brooks, who's written a number of great books, From Strength to Strength and The Life You Were Meant to Live. All of his stuff, he starts with a concept. You go, oh yeah, I know that concept. But then he goes deeper and deeper and deeper. And you go, I've never thought of this before. But it's because he's able to go deep and go past the surface that typically we might do.
But deepening a message with other perspectives helps you not go into your own hole. Sometimes deep means isolated and by yourself in this web of thought. No. We're talking about messages that are going to help somebody. And so collaborating with other authors or other perspectives from other industries is going to help you deepen it in a way that's also helpful.
Absolutely. Yep. Here's another one. Analogies that you could leverage to illuminate your content. This is a little bit like metaphors, but analogies are slightly different. When you are writing to an audience, or for that matter, Jared, speaking to an audience, and you can see, I don't think they're getting it. Their faces are letting me know. You're not nodding in agreement. You're not saying amen or anything like that to you. What analogy is it takes an already familiar concept that they get and attach it to an unfamiliar concept. So analogies are helpful. When I read through what I've written, or even better, I ask Melissa, my assistant, to read through this, and she's not in the same world that I've been in. And she'll go, that was a little sketchy. I don't know what that means. Then I know, okay, it's time for an analogy, some world that she knows, and attach it to a new world.
Really
so
good.
Familiar and unfamiliar is what you need to imagine as you're writing, because you don't know who else is going to read your book. But maybe you get an idea in your imagination when you offer it to someone just to look at and say, what's it missing that would really engage you? As John Maxwell says, what would make you turn the page?
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
There you go. Brilliant.
Yeah.
I love that one.
Good. All right, here's a couple more. I would say, to jumpstart your creativity, think about personal epiphanies or revelations from your life to make it pop, or from the lives of others. So this just forces you to again, go deeper. Think about the last time, maybe it was a day ago, maybe it was 2 days ago, that you had an epiphany, just like a light bulb moment. See, I just did an analogy right there, epiphany. If they don't know what epiphany is, it's a light bulb moment. That's a divine aha. But I think these are very helpful. This just happened recently when I was working on the book I'm working on. I just had a little epiphany. So I wrote it down on my phone to make its way to the laptop that I'm working on. But I guess, listeners, what I'm saying is always have some device with you that you can write out that epiphany as it happens, so you're not leaving it to chance. That can spark creativity all the time. And I try to have some think time at the end of the day, learned this from John, where I'm thinking about those epiphanies of the day. What did I write down? And I've got a page of thoughts or epiphanies.
It's really good.
Yeah.
And it goes to your idea farm?
Yes,
We've
it goes
talked
to
about
the
that
idea
before.
farm. That's exactly right, which is a larger piece of property. Yeah.
Sure. If you've been with us, before on, I guess maybe episode 1, 2, or 3. How about
Something
you go listen to all of them and you see? But the idea farm is a critical component to the writing process because you do have ideas throughout the day, and you got to jot them somewhere. And so having a place for those,
that you can plant them.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah, good. All right, one last idea. This may seem odd because this is for writers who are maybe not imagining how they could do this, but find creative ways you can engage the reader's 5 senses. Now, you might think, well, I'm engaging one sense, their eyeballs. How could I do 5? But that's where your imagination comes in. What do I want them to sense, hear? The great writers, Stephen King and others, know how to make you almost smell that haunted house or sense the fear that's coming. So I guess what I'm saying is, listeners, think about the 5 senses that you have and others have, and think, how could I enlist those with words where they feel like all 5 senses are done? I tell you who did this really well is Walt Disney.
Sure.
If you think about walking into Disney World or Disneyland, all 5 of your senses are engaged. You're going to eat something, you're going to smell something, you're going to see something, you're going to hear something.
Sure.
It's really true. So I think that just jumpstarts creativity, because if you can get all 5 senses involved, they're not going to want to put the book down. But it has to start with your imagination, because you're not having them smell the book. You're just engaging the 5 senses through your words.
Sure,
Yeah.
It's a connection principle.
Yeah.
You're trying to find the way to get inside of not just their head, but also their senses, their heart.
That's right.
How do we touch the heart? Well, we have to go through the senses and connect.
Yeah.
I love that principle. It could be harder with nonfiction and self-help, but having that framework as a concept, it's a connection principle. You're not just writing to a vast you're writing to an audience. You're writing to an intended reader, and you're trying to connect with that individual, that person.
Yeah.
And they have senses too. And so thinking about it that way is very helpful.
Well, I feel like the world that we live in today is different than the world I grew up in. More and more people want their heart engaged, not just their head. Both are important.
Sure.
Which means, what am I feeling? What am I sensing? Well, that's the 5 senses.
Yep.
So I guess I would just say, regardless of how intellectual or academic or scholarly you are out there, people, the consumer, wants to feel, not just think.
Love it.
So,
love it. Let's, you had this statement as we were talking before, how a lot of times creativity is born from necessity.
yes, yeah.
Do you have a story maybe on that would help us to understand that principle?
Yeah, Jared, this may be counterintuitive to our listeners, but it's nice when you have no deadlines and it's just easy to let your mind flow, but most of the time we live in a world of deadlines.
Yeah, that's right.
I have actually found that I can leverage that deadline to make me more creative when that becomes positive pressure. I use the phrase, deadlines are lifelines. That's what they are.
Yep.
So I think necessity should be welcomed by you listeners.
Well, that's good.
Even if you have to put a date on the calendar that's somewhat artificial, but by the 23rd, I got to have this chapter done. And I think of the necessity that one woman felt 30 years ago. It was 1994 that this story began to come out. And I just want to share it as a closer here. So in 1994, a young woman asked for a restraining order on her husband. So the marriage was not good. Wow. And when you do that, often divorce is in the wings. So she ends up filing for divorce, becoming a single mom with a baby overnight. So she's under the gun. Talk about necessity. Mm-hmm. She applied for welfare benefits with no job and very little cash. Her mother, her one confidant, had died a few years earlier, and her relationship with her dad was really rocky. They had not spoken in years. So all the support systems seemed to be missing in her life. In these realities, she began to struggle, by her own admission, with anxiety, depression, loneliness, and even thoughts of suicide. In fact, she called herself, the biggest failure I know is me.
Wow.
I know. So you hear stories once in a while like this, but the way this woman treated the necessity of her day was remarkable. It was just remarkable. So Jared, in the 5 years that followed, she chose to own her circumstances. She even used a phrase, even though this is not my fault, it is my responsibility. That's a great statement. Even though this situation isn't my fault, it is my responsibility. You got to own it. Secondly, she moved to another country. I got to get a fresh start with fresh visuals here. Mm-hmm. She identified what she loved and felt gifted to do, which was writing. So here we are, aspiring authors. She started writing. She began doing what she loved to do in her spare time. All the spare time she had, she would write. Put the baby down, write. Feed the baby, write. That sort of thing. And she refused to give up, even though her ideas were rejected. The book she had written was rejected 12 times. After 10, I'd say, you know what, I'm done. Maybe I had a wacko idea here. But we know this woman. Her name is Joanne, but we know her as J.K. Rowling. It's an incredible story. Harry Potter, 60 billion Harry Potter books exist now. But sometimes our circumstances will be the thing that pushes us. And very often we start feeling like victims. She could have felt like a victim. She was a victim. But instead she said, no, it's not my fault, but it is my responsibility. I'm going to own this. And I would say, writers, probably no one's going to push you to finish the book. You're going to have to figure that out yourself. I mean, we learned that in Book in a Weekend? 1 month in, I don't have any more time, Mm-hmm. So, Jared, I'd like to close with a statement that she made that might just be encouraging, because we know she succeeded.
Oh, yeah.
But she started with nothing. She said at a Harvard University speech she made, a commencement speech in 2008, she said, failure meant a stripping away of the inessential. I stopped pretending to myself that I was anything other than what I was. And I began to direct all of my energy to finishing the only work that mattered to me. Had I really succeeded at anything else, I might never have found the determination to succeed in the one area where I truly belonged. That's kind of good, isn't it?
Yeah.
She said, I was set free because my greatest fear had been realized, and I was still alive. And I still had my daughter, whom I adored. And I had an old typewriter. This kind of sets her age there. And a big idea, which was Harry Potter.
Yep.
And so rock bottom became a solid foundation on which I rebuilt my life.
Wow.
I love that. May we all have that story to tell one day.
Wow. My greatest fear had been realized, and I was still alive.
I'm still alive. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
There's a lot of authors out there, Tim, that you're considering, giving up.
Yeah.
You're considering stopping. You feel stuck. We hope that today was encouraging to you to keep going. And sometimes as you realize your greatest fear and then realize that you're still alive, you get the courage to get back up and keep moving forward. We want to be a part of that journey for you because we believe that the world needs the book in you.